Las Vegas, 1988. Bally's Grand Hotel. Dean Martin stands under a spotlight he stood under 1,000 times before. But something is different tonight. He's holding a cigarette, but he's not smoking it. His fingers grip it loosely, like he's forgotten it's there. The audience waits for the joke they know is coming. The sly smile, the raised eyebrow, the effortless cool. But Dean's eyes sweep across the crowd, and he doesn't see them. Not really. He's looking at something else. Someone else. He starts to tell a joke. His mouth moves, the words come out. But there's no music in his voice, no rhythm, no Dean. The punchline lands flat. A few polite laughs scatter through the showroom, but they die quickly. He flicks the cigarette. For 40 years, that gesture got a laugh. Tonight, it gets silence. They say Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995. But anyone who knew him will tell you the truth. The man the world loved died 8 years earlier, on a frozen mountain in California. What you saw after that was just a ghost, waiting to go home. Dean Paul Martin. Everyone called him Dino. Not after his father's stage name, after the name Dean wanted to leave behind when he became a star. Dino Crocetti, the working-class Italian kid from Steubenville, Ohio, the one who dealt cards in the back room, the one who sang for tips, the one Dean buried under tailored suits and million-dollar contracts. Dino was born in 1951, the year Dean's career was exploding. Movies with Jerry Lewis, hit records, TV specials. But no matter how big Dean got, when Dino walked into a room, everything else disappeared. Frank Sinatra was Dean's partner. Jerry Lewis was his mirror. Sammy Davis Jr. was his brother. But Dino? Dino was his heart. Palm Springs, 1966. Dean had a rare week off between filming and Vegas shows. Dino was 15. They drove out to Tamarisk Clubhouse at dawn, before anyone else arrived. Dean wasn't teaching him how to be a star. He was teaching him how to hold a 7-iron. Keep your head down, kiddo. Don't look up until after you make contact. Dino swung. The ball sliced hard to the right and disappeared into the rough. Ah, damn it. Dean laughed. Not the smooth, rehearsed laugh from the Dean Martin show. The real one. The one that came from his chest. Kid, you're trying too hard. Golf's not about power. It's about rhythm. You gotta let the club do the work. Dino looked at his father. Like singing? Dean paused. Yeah, he said quietly. Like singing. They spent the next 3 hours out there. No cameras, no managers, no autograph seekers. Just a father and his son, chasing little white balls across the green. On the 9th hole, they sat in the cart and drank Cokes. Dino asked, "Dad, do you ever get tired of it?" Tired of what? Being Dean Martin. Dean was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Every single day, pal." Dino nodded. "Then why do you do it?" Dean looked at his son, really looked at him. "Because when I'm Dean Martin, I can give you a life where you don't have to be anyone but yourself." Dino smiled. "What if I don't want to be anyone but your son?" Dean's throat tightened. He put his hand on Dino's head, the way he used to when Dino was small. "Then you're smarter than I ever was." That was the thing about Dino. He didn't want his father's fame. He didn't want the spotlight. He just wanted to fly. At 17, Dino joined the California Air National Guard. By 35, he was piloting F-4 Phantom jets. Dean hated it. Not because he wasn't proud, but because every time Dino went up, he imagined him not coming down. "Why planes?" Dean once asked him at Musso and Frank's Grill. They were sitting in the red leather booth Dean had claimed as his own since 1952. Dino smiled. "Because up there, Dad, I'm not Dean Martin's son. I'm just me." Dean nodded slowly. He understood that better than anyone. March 21st, 1987. A Saturday. Dino and Captain Ramon Ortiz was scheduled for a routine training flight over Southern California. Weather reports showed clear skies. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. At 2:15 p.m., the jet took off from March Air Force Base. At 3:42 p.m., they radioed their position over San Gorgonio Mountain. At 3:45 p.m., the radio went silent. A freak blizzard had rolled in from nowhere. Visibility dropped to 0. The mountain disappeared into white, and so did Dino's plane. Dean was at home when the call came, but it wasn't the Air Force. It was his old friend, Mort Viner, who'd heard it on the news radio. "Dean, Dino's plane is missing. They're searching the mountain now." Dean didn't scream. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Okay," and hung up. The 3 days. The living room was dark. Dean had drawn the curtains, not because he wanted privacy, but because looking outside felt like betrayal, like life was still going on when it shouldn't be. He sat in his leather recliner, the same one he'd sat in every night for 20 years, watching TV, sipping scotch, winding down from shows and recording sessions. But now, the TV was off. The scotch bottle sat untouched on the side table. The only sound was the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Each second felt like an hour. Each hour felt like a lifetime. Dean didn't move. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He just waited. Friends came. Frank Sinatra knocked on the door. "Dag, it's me. Let me in." Dean didn't answer. After 10 minutes, Frank left. The phone rang constantly. Reporters, friends, family. Dean never picked it up. He just stared at it. Because what if the next call was the one? What if the next voice said, "We found him. He's alive"? Or worse, what if they said the other thing? The first night passed, then the second. On the mountain, search teams fought through the blizzard. They used thermal imaging. They sent helicopters up whenever the weather cleared. But the mountain gave them nothing. On the second day, Dean lit a cigarette. His hands shook, not from nerves, from the act of doing something normal when nothing was normal anymore. He took one drag and put it out. It tasted like ash. That afternoon, he stood outside Dino's old bedroom. The door was closed. Dean hadn't opened it in years. Dino had his own place now, his own life. But his room was still here, frozen in time. Dean put his hand on the doorknob, but he couldn't turn it. Because if he went inside, it would feel like saying goodbye. And he wasn't ready to say goodbye. So he just stood there, in the hallway, in the silence, waiting. Frank Sinatra had an idea. Get the gang back together, one last time. Together Again tour. The ultimate Rat Pack reunion. Dean, Frank, Sammy Davis Jr. "Come on, Dag," Frank said over the phone. "We need you. The people need you. Maybe you need this too." Dean was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Okay, Frank." Not because he wanted to, but because saying no required more energy than he had. Oakland Coliseum, March 13th, 1988. Opening night, 16,000 people. A standing ovation before they even walked on stage. Backstage, Dean stood in front of the mirror. Tuxedo, hair perfect, the Dean Martin costume. But the man wearing it was gone. He could hear the crowd, the music, Frank's voice booming through the speakers, warming them up. Dean took a breath and walked toward the light. The crowd erupted when Dean walked out. 15,000 people on their feet, screaming his name, loving him. But Dean just stood there, blinking in the lights, like he'd forgotten where he was. Frank stepped in smoothly. "Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Dean Martin." More cheers, more applause. Frank shot Dean a look, a quick one, the kind only a friend of 40 years would recognize. "Are you okay?" Dean nodded. "I'm fine." The band kicked in. Big brass, soaring strings. The opening notes of Ain't That a Kick in the Head, Dean's signature song. Dean held the microphone, but he didn't sing. The lyrics were supposed to start, but his mouth didn't move. The band played on. The audience waited. Frank stepped in, singing Dean's line with a grin like it was part of the bit. The audience laughed. They thought it was planned. Classic Dean, playing it cool, making Frank do the work. But Dean wasn't playing. He was just gone. Standing on stage in front of 16,000 people, but completely alone. Sammy danced harder, smiled wider, trying to fill the silence Dean left behind. Frank kept singing, kept moving, but his eyes kept darting back to Dean. Dean finally started singing, but his voice was flat, mechanical, like he was reading from a script he didn't understand. The crowd still cheered, because it was Dean Martin, and Dean Martin was supposed to be cool, supposed to make everything look effortless. Halfway through Everybody Loves Somebody, Dean stopped singing mid-verse. He raised his hand. In it was a cigarette, unlit. The band kept playing. Frank kept smiling, improvising lyrics to cover the gap. But Dean just stood there, staring at the cigarette. Then he flicked it. Not gently, not as a joke, just flicked it into the crowd. The audience gasped, a few nervous laughs. Was this part of the show? Frank stepped forward quickly, microphone to his lips. "Folks, Dean's had a long flight. You know how he is." Big laugh from Frank. The audience followed, but it wasn't funny. Dean turned and walked off stage, mid-song. The band stumbled. Frank's smile faltered for just a second. Then he recovered. "Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Martin." The applause came, but it was confused, uncertain. Backstage, Dean sat on a couch, head in his hands. Not crying, just sitting. Frank came in a few minutes later, loosened his bow tie, sat down next to Dean. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Frank said quietly, "You don't have to do this, Dag." Dean didn't look up. "I know." "Then why are you here?" Dean finally looked at Frank, and for the first time, Frank saw it. The emptiness. "I don't know, Frank. I don't know where else to be." 3 weeks later, Dean quit the tour. No announcement, no press conference. He just went home. And he never performed live again. The last 7 years of Dean Martin's life weren't tragic in the dramatic sense. There were no screaming fights, no public breakdowns, no hospital visits. It was quieter than that. And somehow, worse. Every day was the same. He'd wake up around noon, make coffee in the kitchen he'd had installed in 1968, sit in his recliner, turn on the TV. Always westerns. John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, the old ones. He'd watch them without sound sometimes, just the images of men on horses, riding into sunsets, going somewhere. At 6 p.m., he'd get dressed. Always the same outfit. Dark plaques, white shirt, cardigan sweater. And he'd drive to La Familia. Same booth, every night. The owner, Bruno, would have his table ready. Plain pasta, no sauce, glass of water. No wine. Dean had stopped drinking after Dino died, not because of health, because it didn't work anymore. It didn't make him forget, so why bother? Methodically,
like it was something he had to do, not something he wanted to do. Bruno tried to talk to him sometimes. "Dean, you want I should make you something special tonight? Ossobuco? You used to love the ossobuco." Dean would smile. "No thanks, pal. This is perfect." At 7:45, he'd check his watch. At 7:50, he'd put cash on the table. Always exact change, plus a $100 tip. At 8 p.m. sharp, he'd leave. The drive home took 12 minutes. Dean would take the same route every night, past the houses with their lights on. Families inside, laughter, life. Then he'd pull into his driveway, turn off the car, sit in the dark for a minute, and then go inside. In his bedroom, there was a photo on his nightstand. Dino at 25, in his flight suit, smiling. Dean would look at it every night before bed, not with sadness, with patience. Like he was saying, "I'm coming, kiddo. Just not yet."
The years passed. Friends called less and less. Not because they didn't care, but because Dean had made it clear he wanted to be left alone. Frank Sinatra stopped by a few times. They'd sit in silence, mostly. Frank doing most of the talking, Dean just nodding. By 1995, Dean's health was failing. Lung cancer, emphysema, kidney problems. His doctor told him he needed to come in for tests. Dean said, "What for?" The doctor didn't have an answer. December 25th, 1995, Christmas morning. Dean woke up at 8 a.m., earlier than usual. He sat on the edge of his bed. His breathing was labored. His chest hurt. But he didn't call anyone. He picked up the phone and called his daughter, Diana. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." "Merry Christmas, Dad. Are you coming over for dinner?" Dean looked out the window. The sun was coming up over the hills. It was going to be a beautiful day. "I don't think so, baby. I'm a little tired." "Are you okay, Dad?" "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm really fine." For the first time in 8 years, he meant it. "I love you, Diana. I love you too, Dad." He hung up, and then he laid back down. 3 hours later, Dean Martin was gone. The world remembered Dean Martin as the king of cool, the man with the cigarette and the cocktail, the one who made everything look easy. They remembered the songs, the movies, the TV show, the jokes, the charm, the effortless grace. But the truth is, Dean Martin was never cool. He was just a father who learned how to hide his heart behind a microphone. And when his son died, he didn't know how to hide it anymore. So he stopped trying. Some people say Dean gave up after Dino's death, that he let grief win. But maybe that's not the right way to see it. Maybe Dean Martin understood something the rest of us are afraid to admit. Some things aren't meant to be survived. They're meant to be honored. And some losses are so deep that the only way to honor them is to stop pretending you're still whole. Dean Martin didn't fear death. He welcomed it. Not because he wanted to die, but because he wanted to go home. And for Dean Martin, home wasn't a mansion in Beverly Hills. It wasn't a stage in Las Vegas. It wasn't fame or fortune or applause. Home was wherever his son was waiting. And on Christmas morning, 1995, Dean Martin finally went home.